5 3 9 7 1 5.
Welcome again to another episode of Bigfoot for Breakfast. We appreciate you joining us over and over for your weekly dose of creepy here at the home of the mysterious and the macabre, where we sit in the studio every week challenging conventional thought. We are your hosts, Sarah Jones
and Samantha Carter.
Make sure you hit that subscribe button on whichever app you listen to, and don't forget to leave a rating and a review, because this really helps out the show a lot, and we really appreciate hearing from all of you. Hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and make sure you check out our website, www.bigfootforbreakfast.com. Those are just a few of the ways that you can get to know us better or contact us. You can also send us an email at bigfootforbreakfast@outlook.com, or you can leave us a voicemail or text at 641-812-2635.
I want to give a quick shout out to Trent, who gave us a shout out on Facebook this week, just letting us know that he'd found our show and enjoyed it, and also enjoyed our witty banter.
Yeah, so take that.
Haters.
I mean, we still love the haters, but it's hard to please everyone. So it's really nice when people send us a nice message saying that they like that about the show. When we're feeling kind of down, when people call us junior high.
And also say, well, we like the information you portray, but we do not like your personalities. So,
yeah, indeed.
So anyway, we're gathered here today
to tell you that we're likable.
It's a circle to explore the mysteries of the universe.
You're listening to the Prescribed Films Podcast Network, home to hundreds of hours of free podcast entertainment. The shows on this network all have a common goal, providing you with the best discussions about movies and other forms of entertainment media. The PFPN hopes to fill your earholes with audio joy. Visit our website with links to all the other amazing shows at www.thepfpn.com. Thanks for listening.
We are gathered here today to once again explore the mysteries of the universe. It is a rare, but not that rare, occurrence that earthly humans encounter unexplainable and seemingly otherworldly crafts or beings. When hearing stories about unidentified flying objects, also referred to as UFOs or UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon, as well as possible alien encounters, we definitely try to look at all the possibilities while keeping an air of skepticism and objectivity.
Just a slight air, though. Like, we're pretty #we believe, is right?
Hashtag the truth is out there.
Hashtag Mulder and Scully.
Hashtag from this light, you somewhat resemble David Duchovny. I don't know if that's a compliment, Sarah, but
it is.
Mulder with bangs.
Mulder had bangs. It was the 90s.
Truth. So anyway, the same goes for reading military or government documentation regarding such encounters because, cover-ups and such. As we talked about in our episode covering the Rendlesham Forest experience, many of those who witnessed the encounter report that their statements had been edited from their original versions. And the truth is out there, somewhere. But let's start with September 14th, 1952. This day marked the beginning of a NATO exercise in which 80,000 men, over 200 ships, and 1,000 aircraft participated. Among these men and vessels were the United States Navy, the British Royal Navy, the French Navy, the Royal Canadian Navy, the Royal Danish Navy, Royal Norwegian Navy.
Okay, there's a lot of navies there from all over the world, correct?
Portuguese, Netherlands, and Belgians. And they're all royal.
Why aren't we? Well, I know why we're not royal. America.
There was a tea party about it. I don't know if you remember.
The whole, revolutionary thing. What was that?
The shot heard round the world. Mm-hmm. It was the start of the revolution.
Okay, well, let's keep going. The navies. After the navies.
These military bodies convened in a joint effort to convince Denmark and Norway that attacks from the Soviet Union could be thwarted by NATO efforts.
So, in the fall of 1952, there were a series of these types of NATO exercises which collectively involved up to 300,000 military personnel who engaged in these maneuvers all over the place, spanning from the Arctic Circle to the Mediterranean Sea. But we're going to focus on one such exercise known as Mainbrace. And we know Sam's going to reverb that.
Mainbrace.
This was the largest military exercise to occur during peacetime since World War II. The primary function of this particular war game was a response to a mock Soviet attack on Europe, a NATO flex, if you will. Somebody's been on TikTok.
Nice flex, bro. Before we get into this story, though, I feel like 1952 was an important year in the field of ufology. This was the year that Project Blue Book was established. The project was the third of its kind, preceded by Project Saucer and Project Sign. This was a military intelligence program whose purpose was to collect information on UFO sightings, and in July that year there was a sighting of UFOs over Washington, D.C., which is a whole other episode, so I'm not going to get into much detail, but it is important to know because of this incident. In the time before the launch of Mainbrace, the military personnel had been jokingly warned to keep an eye on the sky, so to speak.
So it was December... No, it wasn't.
It was not. God damn it.
It was September, rather, 13th of 1952, located somewhere north of Bornholm Island. The captain and crew of a Danish naval destroyer caught a glimpse of what was described as a triangular-shaped object sailing southeast across the night sky at alarmingly fast speeds, around an estimated 900 miles per hour. According to Lieutenant Commander Schmidt Jensen, his first name was Schmidt.
Yeah.
Damn it.
God damn it, Schmidt.
This was only the first of many sightings that were reported during the execution of Operation Mainbrace.
A copy of a Norwegian newspaper clipping published in Harstad newspaper was obtained by the CIA as part of their routine monitoring for foreign press, which concerned an incident that had occurred on September 18th of 1952. A CIA translation of the article reads as follows. On 18 September at 1400 hours, 3 forestry workers who were working right outside of Kirkenes noticed a flat, round object hovering motionless at about 500 meters altitude. The object appeared to have a diameter of 15 to 20 meters. After the workers had observed the object for a while, it suddenly flew away at great speed in a northwesterly direction. It appears that only these workers saw the object. They swear, however, that their report is true. And that's the article. So you may find it interesting that the characteristics of the craft described were similar to a report of a similar incident as little as one day after this one.
It was just before 11 o'clock in the morning on the date of September 19th, 1952, just days before the initial sighting at the launch of Mainbrace, as a British Meteor jet aircraft was returning to the airfield while approaching for landing, it appeared that a large silvery object was following behind it. It was described to have been swaying back and forth like a pendulum, which led them to initially believe that they may be seeing a parachute. It would then become obvious that it was not. Observers on the ground at the Royal Air Force Base at Topcliffe, Yorkshire, England, including Lieutenant John W. Kilburn, described that as the British aircraft began circling to prepare for landing, the UFO stopped. It stopped. The unidentified flying object was described by onlookers as being disc-shaped.
What? It looks like a giant Johnson.
It was reported that it appeared to rotate on its axis as it hovered before suddenly shooting off in a westward direction at a very high speed. The craft then changed course of travel, disappearing to the southeast. This UFO incident was witnessed by at least 6 Royal Air Force crewmen, and unlike previous UFO sightings, this one was not covered up by the Navy or the Air Force. This story went to the press, igniting an immense public interest in the topic as well as a media circus. The Topcliffe incident was just one of the first in a series of reports made by military personnel that reached the Air Ministry, including a growing number of incidents involving the tracking of fast-moving unidentified objects on Royal Air Force radars. It would be the reports of the incidents and sightings during the NATO Operation Mainbrace that would push the Royal Air Force to officially recognize UFOs, according to Project Blue Book's Captain Edward Ruppelt.
In a memorandum penned by the CIA's Assistant Director of Scientific Intelligence, Dr. H. Marshall Chadwell, in December of 1952, which was obtained in 2001 after an application and appeal under the Freedom of Information Act. For the record, it noted that UFO activity was quiet and normal until what was lovingly referred to as the Yorkshire incident. In part, the memo reads as follows, quote, In some Royal Air Force field, there was some sort of demonstration to which high officials of the Royal Air Force in London had been invited. During the show, a perfect flying saucer was seen by these officials as well as Royal Air Force pilots. So many people saw it that many articles appeared in the public press. End quote. Something happened, some people saw it, basically.
Yeah. Lieutenant John Kilburn of the 269th Squadron, who we had mentioned previously as one of the witnesses of the event, made an official statement, which is as follows. Quote, "The meteor was at approximately 5,000 feet and approaching from the east. Flight Lieutenant Paris suddenly noticed a white object in the sky at a height between 10 and 20,000 feet, some 5 miles astern of the meteor. The object was silver in color and circular in shape. It appeared to be traveling at a much slower speed than the meteor, but was on a similar course. It maintained the slow forward speed for a few seconds before commencing to descend, swinging in a pendular motion during the descent similar to a falling sycamore leaf. This was at first thought to be a parachute or engine cowling. The meteor, meanwhile, turned towards Dishforth, and the object, while continuing its descent, appeared to follow suit. After a further few seconds, the object stopped its pendulous motion and its descent, and began to rotate on its own axis. Suddenly, it accelerated at an incredible speed toward the west, turning onto a southeasterly heading before disappearing. All of this occurred in a matter of 15 to 20 seconds. The acceleration was in excess of that of a shooting star. I've never seen such phenomenon before. The movements of the object were not identifiable with anything I have seen in the air, and the rate of acceleration was unbelievable."
The very next day, September 20th, 1952, the United States ship Franklin D. Roosevelt, an aircraft carrier participating in the Mainbrace maneuvers, also known as the Swanky Frankie.
That's a great nickname.
Cannot confirm.
Swanky Frankie.
I'm not all that certain that Roosevelt was swanky, but the ship may have been.
Roosevelt seemed like a rugged guy. Isn't he the one that they're always like depicting as riding on horseback with like guns and like shooting elephants and stuff?
We do not condone the killing of elephants. The Swanky Frankie had its own UFO sighting. Men aboard the aircraft carrier reported seeing a silvery spherical object moving across the sky behind the fleet. What sets this particular sighting apart from the rest is that Wallace Littman is there. Yes, the Wallace Littman, who managed to snap a little series of color photographs of the UFO that was seen by the crew of the FDR. These photographs were examined by Navy intelligence officers, but not by anyone else because these pictures were never made public. There was a very bad print of one of the photographs which appears in the Project Blue Book files, but there was no analysis report in the file to accompany the photo. Weird, right? Yeah, it is. So, especially since the rumor on the street is that the photographs taken by the reporter were supposed to have been great quality photos. A series which was able to demonstrate the rapid movement of the object as it moved across the sky. Of course, being experienced professional military personnel, they investigated the possibility that the object could have been a balloon which had been launched from one of the other ships. The conclusion of that immediate investigation was that exactly none of the nearby ships had launched a balloon. But what was the official conclusion? It was probably a balloon.
This wasn't the end of the UFO sightings for those men participating in this NATO exercise. On the 21st of October, 1952, a flying instructor, Lieutenant Michael Swiney, and his Royal Navy student, Lieutenant David Crofts, were in a flight exercise from the flying school at Little Rissington, Gloucestershire, observed 3 circular plate-like objects in flight when their jet punched through a layer of cloud around 12,000 feet. Initially, like one of the previous sightings, the objects were thought to have been parachutes. However, they were described as being iridescent, like circular pieces of glass reflecting on the sun. They remained stationary in their initial encounter before appearing to change position, subsequently vanishing from sight. Flight instructor Swiney called to abandon the training flight, reported the sighting to ground control, and then returned to base with his also shaken student. Upon returning to base, the 2 men were ordered to be sequestered in their quarters overnight. The next day, the Air Ministry team was on site to interview them about the encounter.
Of the encounter, Swiney made the following comment in an interview in 2004. Quote, "I was frightened. I make no bones about it. It was something supernatural, perhaps, and when I landed, someone told me I looked as if I'd seen a ghost. I immediately thought of saucers because it was actually what they looked like. I even put an entry in my logbook which reads, saucers. 3 flying saucers sighted at a height confirmed by GCI, which is radar, end quote. As far as his official statement written for the Air Ministry team who were brought in, it sounds like it was destroyed, as I'm sure were the drawings that the men were asked to render of the objects that they had seen. David Crofts, the student flying with Swiney, recalled that he was told they, meaning Air Intelligence, had been in communication with every country in the world that was likely to have that sort of aircraft in the vicinity, and drew a blank. They also said that they, meaning the UFOs, had been picked up on radar. Fighters had been scrambled and the target had a ground speed of 600 knots, heading east, but the fighters saw nothing, didn't make contact, and returned to base.
After his retirement, Swiney attempted to obtain a copy of the original report. His statement included, he found out at the time, much to his and our dismay, that it was a standard operating practice prior to 1967 to shred and destroy all UFO encounter records and reports every 5 years. What the hell? It looks like the only record that still remains is this flight school record, a single sheet of paper in which it was documented that the objects had been sighted while on the navigational exercise. And although the sighting was backed up and confirmed by radar readings, the Air Ministry denied any likelihood that the unidentifiable flying object would be extraterrestrial in nature. The incident was buried.
On that very same day, around 7:30 p.m., another UFO sighting report was made at the Karup field in Denmark. 3 Danish Air Force officers reported having seen an object that they described as a shiny disk with a metallic appearance pass overhead from the direction of the fleet and disappear in the clouds to the east of the base. That's about the extent of the information I had been able to find on this particular sighting. Wasn't able to come up with any names of the officers or any other details on the sighting outside of the fact that is reported to have happened.
William McGuire, formerly of the RAF, was posted to RAF Sandwich, Kent, England, during Mainbrace, and his testimony regarding an incident on the 21st of September 1952 was as follows. Quote, my memory was that everything was a complete flap. Normally, in a military situation, everything is ordered, regular, and set out. But there was a situation that was plainly out of control. Mechanics were flying about all over the place. According to his experience, as McGuire got his bearings, the reason behind the chaos and the panic became apparent. He described a huge, unidentified aerial object which was being tracked on the radar over the English Channel. The mechanics were being blamed for not calibrating the instruments properly. We were being blamed for not interpreting the readings correctly. Every single instrument on the base was showing this enormous object sitting up at an unbelievable height. It was the size of a warship, and it just stood there.
The NATO exercise known as Mainbrace would still be active for another 3 days following these 2 sightings. And as I'm sure you've already deduced at this point, this would not be the last UFO encounter of the exercise. Also on September 21st, there were 6 British pilots out flying a formation of Royal Air Force jets above the North Sea. On this occasion, the 6 pilots spotted a shiny sphere approaching from the direction of the fleet. It sounds like they made an attempt to pursue, but the UFO eluded the jets and disappeared. Upon returning to the base, one of the pilots observed the UFO following his plane. He turned to chase it again, but the UFO also turned and sped away, evading the pilot yet again.
It's difficult to believe that with so many reports by military personnel that there isn't more recorded information regarding these sightings. The higher level military officers seem to stand firm that the sightings were certainly not extraterrestrial. So why eliminate the statements and reports from the record, especially if they were dismissed as natural phenomena or dismissed as something that didn't happen at all? Why only keep those records for 5 years at a time? Most of these encounters were limited only to reports of a few witnesses who saw the phenomena but never had any evidence of its occurrence. Some of these military sightings, especially those that occurred during the NATO Mainbrace exercise, were corroborated with radar evidence that there was something, although there was no conclusion in most cases as to what that something was. Prior to these sightings, there had been radar indication of an unknown phenomena during World War II and after, but those were not corroborated by witness sightings. These incidents definitely seem to make the phenomenon more real, or at the very least be taken a little bit more seriously by the governing bodies of all countries.
In a publication titled Watching the Skies, author Jack Goff describes what were referred to as angel and ghost echoes, which is how they refer to those unexplained indications on the Royal Air Force radars which had no visual evidence to confirm the presence of a craft of any kind during the early 1950s. Some, from the ground, could be perceived as a cloud of responses similar to the echoes obtained by small aircraft, and at times could easily be mistaken for military aircraft as they followed a steady course of travel and plotted heights from 2,000 feet to 10,000 feet.
So one of the two competing theories vying to explain the radar angels phenomenon was that they could have been caused by abnormal and rare atmospheric conditions that created pockets of air that would be capable of being or reflecting radar beams, producing false targets on the radars. So this is a sound theory, right? It's more conceivable than the other theory. However, it doesn't explain how some of these angels moved against the prevailing winds or faster than measured wind speeds.
The second theory, which is considered less likely at the time, was that angels were formation clusters of birds flying to and from their breeding grounds as part of their annual migrations. There actually were a few ornithologists who utilized radar technology to study bird movements, which makes it seem like a good viable theory, but they had a difficult time persuading the British Royal Air Force to consider this to be a legitimate and serious theory, in spite of the fact that coastal radar stations during the war had correlated angels on their radar screens with flights of seabirds which had been spotted with the naked eye, as well as the large individual birds which had been found to cause chaos on the radar screens on occasion.
Obviously, with Cold War tensions compiling, the most obvious assumptions of those who were involved with Project Sign investigations were that these UFOs were most likely sophisticated Soviet aircraft. There were, however, researchers who continued to lean in the direction that they might be spacecraft from other worlds. This was known as the extraterrestrial hypothesis.
The Soviet origins theory was rejected by Swedish, British, and U.S. military investigators because no recognizable rocket fragments were ever found. And according to some sightings, the objects displayed some combination of leaving no exhaust trail, moving too slowly, flying horizontally, traveling and maneuvering in formation, and appearing to be silent. One classification document from the Swedish military that had been released in 1997 reads as follows.
For some time, we have been concerned by the recurring reports of flying saucers. They periodically continue to pop up. During the last week, one was observed hovering over Neubiberg Air Force Base for about 30 minutes. They have been reported by so many sources and from such a variety of places that we are convinced that they cannot be disregarded and must be explained on some basis, which is perhaps slightly beyond the scope of our present intelligence thinking. When officers of this directorate recently visited the Swedish Air Force Intelligence Service, this question was put to the Swedes. The answer was that some reliable and fully technically qualified people have reached the conclusion that these phenomena are obviously the result of a high technical skill, which cannot be credited to any presently known culture on Earth. They are therefore assuming that these objects originate from some previously unknown or unidentifiable technology, possibly outside of Earth. This conclusion of this document leaves us with the following thought. We are inclined not to discredit entirely this somewhat spectacular theory. Meantime, keeping an open mind on the subject. This document does not obviously predate the Mainbrace exercise, but I did feel like it was relevant to disclose the possibility that these crafts having otherworldly origins wasn't entirely dismissed by military or government entities.
In fact, the British government's military Ministry of Defense had a UFO desk and the telephone hotline that collected around 11,000 cryptic sightings from across the United Kingdom between 1962 and 2009. I guess when the 5-year period of destruction for the 1962 records came up, we lucked out, since they decided in 1967 to stop destroying reports. In 2009, the unit was shut down. According to the Defense Minister Bob Ainsworth in November of 2009, the UFO operation was, quote, consuming increasing resources but produces no valuable defense output, end quote. He stated that in more than 50 years, no UFO sighting report, quote, has ever revealed anything to suggest an extraterrestrial presence or military threat to the UK, end quote. But that's just what a government man who didn't want you to know about the aliens would say.
Indeed. At the time of Mainbrace sightings, Winston Churchill was the prime minister. While he didn't necessarily drink the Kool-Aid, so to speak, the sightings did tickle the curiosity a little bit. Churchill authored an essay which was originally titled, "Are We Alone in Space?" which he later revised and renamed, "Are We Alone in the Universe?" In this essay, Churchill explored the thoughts and theories regarding the possibility of extraterrestrial life, using what could be described as a more scientific thought process, dissecting what life really is. The requirements for it to exist, such as elements like liquid, water. Of course, in the paper, he also offered speculation of the possibility of life existing on other planets and in other solar systems. It was not beneath Churchill to throw a dash of his distaste to the state of the world politics at the time into his writings, stating, quote, "I, for one, am not so immensely impressed by the success we are making of our civilization here, that I am prepared to think we are the only spot in this immense universe which contains living, thinking creatures, or that we are the highest type of mental and physical development which has ever appeared in the vast compass of space and time, which I feel is actually pretty fair and still relevant as an opinion today. So Winston Churchill for the win there."
That's not the end of Churchill's UFO experience. He actually faced an accusation by the grandson of one of his personal bodyguards for ordering the cover-up of a Second World War encounter between a UFO and a Royal Air Force bomber. It was said that a cover-up involved the failure to disclose documents and information for fear of public panic or loss of faith in religion. The allegation was made after apparently a conversation was heard which involved Churchill making the statements about his reasons for withholding the information from the public. Documents revealing this debauchery were released in the early 2000s from the sounds of it, or somewhere around there. According to the released files, there were more than 600 reports of UFO sightings in 1996, compared to the previous average 240 reports per year in the years preceding. Speculation was that the reports of sightings increased that year because, dun 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 dun, a certain TV show was debuted that year. Any guesses on what show that might be? Anyone? Anyone? Fry? Yep, you guessed it. It was The X-Files.
That year, 343 letters from the public to the Ministry of Defense UFO desk that we discussed earlier, as well as 22 inquiries and questions from military police, like we said before. In 2009, they closed that desk down, and shortly thereafter, files were released to the public. Dr. Clark, a UFO consultant to the National Archives, told the BBC, quote, "Since the Freedom of Information Act arrived in 2005, this subject, UFOs, have become the third most popular subject for people to write to the Ministry of Defense, saying, 'Please could you release this file or papers that you hold on this particular case?' What they've decided to do is totally open and to say, look, we're not holding any secrets back about this subject. We've all got all these files and we're going to make them available to the public." This included some files from the 1950s. Unfortunately, not from 1952, as they had all been destroyed per the bullshit policy at the time.
I mean, honestly, I can kind of see why it would have seemed like a more appealing option not to release this type of report or information to the general public, from Churchill and the other world leaders' perspectives. Remember what happened on Sunday, October 30th, 1938, when Columbia Broadcasting System broadcast an episode of the American radio drama anthology series, The Mercury Theater on the Air, directed and narrated by Orson Welles as an adaptation of the H.G. Wells novel, The War of the Worlds. Do ya? Well, I do. I remember. I was there. It was terrible. Okay, I'm lying. But someone alive today probably was, and I wish they were here to tell us about it. But they're not. So I'm going to tell you, and you're going to like it. So if you haven't the slightest idea to what I am referring, you, my friend, are in for a gosh darn treat. So obviously you've at least heard of the Tom Cruise movie if you haven't seen it. So the radio show program begins as a simulation of a normal evening radio broadcast featuring a weather report and music from a live local hotel ballroom. After a few minutes, the music begins to be interrupted by several news flashes about strange gas explosions on Mars. And an interview is arranged with the reporter Carl Phillips and Princeton-based professor of astronomy Richard Pearson, who dismisses speculation about life on Mars, and then the musical program returns temporarily but is interrupted again by news of strange meteorite landings in Grover Mills, New Jersey. Phillips and Pearson are dispatched to the site where a large crowd is gathered, and they describe a chaotic atmosphere where strange cylindrical objects, which they state they believe to be made of an extraterrestrial metal. The cylinder unscrews and Philip describes a tentacled, horrific monster that emerges from inside. Police officers approach the Martian waving a flag of truce, but the invaders respond by firing a heat ray, which incinerates the delegation and ignites the nearby woods and cars as the crowds scream. Phillips shouts about the incoming flames and they're cut off mid-sentence. And after a moment of dead air, announcer explains that the remote broadcast was interrupted due to some difficulty with our field transmission. So, bearing that in mind, many people tuned in after the introduction of the show, so they weren't aware that it was a drama performance because they'd been listening to a more popular program, The Chase and Sanborn Hour with Edgar Bergen, and changed the channel during an interlude. The War of the Worlds broadcast had become historically famous for allegedly causing panic among its listening audience. The scale at which this panic occurred is commonly disputed because it doesn't sound like the audience was actually that big. But there was some panic, and that's the point, which may have led to speculation that if information such as this were released to the public, the panic would be there and on a likely larger scale, and this time, it would be for real. And while it would be cool if we could be certain our world leaders were honest with us, and it would be cool to get the announcement confirming the existence of UFOs and aliens, it might not be cool to experience the breakdown of society as a result of mass panic. So at about 38 minutes into the broadcast, they took a break and announced again that it was a dramatization. So that was probably helpful.
I wonder if back then people would have panic purchased toilet paper. I doubt it. People probably had their priorities straight back then. You're giving way too much credit to humanity. Anyway, back to Mainbrace. Apparently in 2014, the CIA posted a tweet claiming it was us. Their tweet read, quote, "Do you remember the reports of unusual activity in the sky in the 50s? That was us." Quote, end quote. End tweet. They apparently then went on to explain that all the sightings of mysterious flying crafts traveling at high speeds with flashing lights were actually test flights of the secret USA military planes, more specifically, U-2 spy planes, flying altitudes of 18,000 meters, which would have been way above most normal passenger planes and other military aircraft. And when the sun set below the horizon, the top secret planes were still high enough to reflect the sun's rays. Other pilots then saw them as bright silvery objects in the night sky. In response to this tweet, UFO expert Nigel Watson, author of the UFO Investigations Manual, stated, quote, "As early as 1962, a U.S. engineer called Leon Davidson warned ufologists that the CIA was feeding them with false information to sustain the idea that UFOs were interplanetary vehicles. He also stated, quote, "It is also noteworthy that they mentioned the U-2 caused UFO sightings over Norway in the late 1950s. Yet this does not explain a multitude of sightings over Norway and Denmark during the NATO Operation Mainbrace exercises in 1952 before the U-2 was built." End quote. So what's the point of this tweet? Who can say? You know how we feel about it. The CIA are liars with their pants on fire.
That's just our opinion. In order to prove to the public that the UFO phenomenon is not really intergalactic aircraft, the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence collaborated with a professor of mathematical physics at the California Institute of Technology named Howard Percy Robertson in an effort to gather a panel of non-military scientists who met for a few days in January of 1953 to review Air Force records about UFO sightings going back to 1947. It sounds like one of the determinations of the panel was that, quote, "the general public with their panic and hysteria could overwhelm the resources of the U.S. government," end quote, in a time of crisis. The Robertson panel also suggested that educational programs to debunk UFO sightings and teach the public how to identify certain phenomenon using articles, TV shows, and movies could tend to reduce the current gullibility of the public and their susceptibility to clever, hostile propaganda. Critics of this panel and the programs they suggested speculate that the real goal of the Robertson panel and even Project Blue Book was never to identify what was really going on with UFO sightings, but simply to alleviate the public concern about them. It's also been suggested that the government never even allowed the Robertson panel or even Project Blue Book to actually review the most sensitive of the UFO sightings, as they may have contained classified information. There was even a memo in 1969 signed by Brigadier General Carroll H. Bolender suggesting that the U.S. Air Force hadn't shared all UFO sightings with Project Blue Book and would continue to investigate sightings on their own that could present a national security threat after the project ended. And to this day, the Navy is in charge of the investigations into unidentified aerial phenomenon. As we said earlier, while we understand the reason behind this practice, we still hate it. The truth is out there, and we want to know about it.
According to Gerald K. Haynes, a historian for the CIA's National Reconnaissance Office, the CIA has claimed responsibility for more than half the UFO reports the government received in the late 50s and into the 60s. These confessions were, of course, made after the conclusion of Project Blue Book. According to the CIA confessions, these sightings were actually secret U-2 and Oxcart spy flights by the U.S. governments, and once U-2 started flying at altitudes above 60,000 feet, air traffic controllers began receiving increasing numbers of UFO reports, according to documents.
The CIA cross-referenced UFO sightings and U-2 flight logs, which enabled the investigators to dismiss the majority of those UFO reports, so members of Project Blue Book would explain them by linking them to natural phenomena such as ice crystals and temperature inversions in order to hide these clandestine flights from the U.S. from the citizens of America, thus the tweet. So maybe this explains some of the sightings that led to the warning prior to Operation Mainbrace. Maybe the warning made people see things that weren't what they thought they were, and maybe the radar was simply malfunctioning or seeing flocks of birds or angels and ghosts. Who knows? Maybe it was all a coincidence that so many sightings happened in the same vicinity around the same time. Maybe the sneaky American military were testing stealth craft during Mainbrace and weren't as stealthy as they had intended to be. Maybe it was the Soviets.
Even politicians in high places have made comments which lead us to believe that they think that there may have been more to the flying saucer phenomenon than is reaching the public eye or ears. Rumor has it that some modern American presidents have taken an interest in the extraterrestrial. On Jimmy Kimmel Live in 2014, former President Bill Clinton revealed that during his time in office, he'd asked people to look into both Area 51 and Roswell files. Kimmel then asked Clinton, quote, "If you saw that there were aliens there, would you tell us?" And Clinton responded in the affirmative. However, if you, like us, are more inclined to believe in a large-scale cover-up, doesn't this just seem like further evidence of spreading disinformation? I did not have any knowledge of that alien. I did not have any knowledge of that alien, is just what a Clinton would say.
Any given government entity undoubtedly has the means for an entirely effective alien or UFO cover-up. The military and intelligence communities have the authority to classify information and make it a crime to not fall in line and keep the secrets. This confidential information is restricted to a limited number of people in high places, or deep dark places more like, but can also be geographically isolated, locked down in military installations which take up millions and millions of acres across the U.S. That's a lot of land to hide behind. And it's no play on words to say that these secrets are buried, deep, underground, protected by soldiers and guns, and if the rumors are to be believed, advanced alien technology that have been traded to governments in exchange for the right to abduct citizens and experimentation. If you haven't already, listen to our episode on Dulce Air Force Base for a little more detail on that. Something tells me for certain if these tunnel systems and underground bases exist in America, there's a pretty good chance that they exist in other countries as well. And we've all heard the rumor that the Queen is a reptilian.
Unfortunately, much to our dismay and dissatisfaction, there were never any definitive answers, as usual, about the UFO sightings of NATO Operation Mainbrace. I find it very hard to dismiss so many sightings from so many locations by military personnel from so many different countries, but that's just us. Thank you again for listening to Bigfoot for Breakfast, and once again for following us down the rabbit hole. Keep listening as we continue to spiral down through various mysteries of the universe. If you want to contact us for any reason, shoot us an email at bigfootforbreakfast@outlook.com, send us a Facebook message, or post on our wall. We love memes. You can always post those on our Facebook wall. You can follow us on Instagram, send us messages on there as well. You can also leave us a voicemail and let us know what you think of the show. Show us some love or bombard us with public ridicule, whatever, and we'll play it on the next episode. That number is 641-812-2635. Stay tuned for next week's episode. It's a really creepy one. See you next time.
Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye. Leave.
at me, bro.